They were young, too young to imagine their names fading into dust. Some were farm boys from Kansas, others steel mill workers from Pittsburgh. They joked in muddy trenches, passed around photographs of girls back home, and counted the days until they could return to faces that loved them. They never did. Their bodies rest on foreign soil, Normandy, the Ardennes, the Pacific, but their impact rippled across the world. These are the American soldiers who never came home, yet changed the war anyway, because sometimes history is not shaped by the generals who gave the orders, but by the men who followed them. They did not seek glory. They did not seek medals. They sought only one thing: to make sure the world would never again fall into darkness. Their sacrifice was not just bravery. It was the moment they realized that freedom is not inherited, it is earned. This film is not about the victories carved into textbooks. It is about them, the boy who jumped on a grenade to save his brothers, the medic who ran into machine gun fire with no weapon in his hands, the pilot who held his burning aircraft steady long enough for his crew to escape. They never made it home. But because of them, millions did. They say a soldier dies only twice, once when his heart stops beating, and again when his name is spoken for the last time. So tonight, we speak their names. The story begins in 1944, aboard a transport ship pushing steadily across the violent Atlantic. The ocean is black and restless, waves slam against steel. Hundreds of tired young men sit packed shoulder to shoulder, helmets on, rifles across their lap, breathing salt and fear. They don't know where they're going, only that it's somewhere dangerous. A 19-year-old private named William Billy Carter holds a tiny folded letter in his hand. The edges are soft, worn down by constant reading. "Dear Billy, please be safe.
We love you."
Love, Mom." He reads it again, and again. The ship shakes. A loud bang echoes across the hull. Depth charges exploding nearby. Someone whispers, "U-boats." Another mutters a prayer under his breath. Billy swallows hard. He isn't afraid of dying. He's afraid of not getting to say goodbye. The boys on that ship, thousands of them, had dreams. Baseball tryouts, college applications, proposals they planned to make after the war, but fate decided something else. D-Day. On the morning of June 6th, the sea opens into gray mist. The wind bites like needles. Billy jumps into water so cold it locks the breath in his throat. Machine gun fire rips the air. Men disappear beneath the waves, weighed down by packs and rifles. They never even reach the sand. Billy pushes forward, his boots sinking into the blood-soaked surf. A mortar explodes. Sand, water, and shrapnel hammer his body. He drops in stunned. A medic drags him behind a steel obstacle. "You're good, move." Billy nods, stands, takes 3 steps, a rifle crack, he falls. There is no last speech. No dramatic moment. Just a young man whose story should have continued, and yet, Billy helped change the war because soldiers behind him saw him fall. They felt grief ignite into anger. They charged harder, farther, faster. Sometimes courage is not the man who survives. Sometimes courage is the man who doesn't. Across the channel, a telegram arrives in a quiet American kitchen. The Secretary of War desires to express his deep regret. The mother screams. The father sits, silent and shaking. The world moves on. But for that family, time stops. Another story unfolds thousands of miles away in the dense, steaming jungles of the Pacific. Private First Class Daniel Ruiz takes point position, machete in hand, clearing brush as the platoon advances. Sweat stings his eyes. Mosquitoes swarm. The air smells of mud and rot. Every leaf feels like a threat. Every shadow could hold death. Marines move carefully, fingers tight on triggers. There are no front lines here. Only ambush or survival. A sudden burst of gunfire erupts. Ruiz doesn't think. He reacts. He throws himself onto a Japanese grenade that lands inches from his squad. He does not hesitate. He does not scream. The explosion is muffled beneath his body. His squad lives. He doesn't. His mother receives his Medal of Honor in a neatly folded box. Inside it is a certificate, a ribbon, and silence. Ruiz once wrote in a letter home, "Tell everyone I didn't die scared. War is made of millions of such letters, letters written slowly, and answered quickly, with a knock on the door." Another story begins on a freezing mountainside in Italy. Corporal Theodore Hall, a medic, crawls through snow to reach a wounded soldier. Machine gun bullets tear into the ground beside him, kicking up ice and dirt, but he keeps crawling. Medics weren't required to carry weapons. Theo chose not to. "Help me," the soldier whispers. Theo tears open a pouch and works fast. Bandage, morphine, pressure. The wounded man is shivering so violently that Theo places his own jacket over him. Then another scream echoes nearby. Another man is hit. Theo bolts toward him. Then another, and another. He runs a total of 12 trips, up and down that exposed hill, dragging men by their collars, pushing them with adrenaline-fueled strength. On trip 13, he is hit. He falls face first into the snow. A bullet punches through his chest. Blood stains the icy ground around him, but he crawls, one elbow, then the other. He reaches the next wounded man and uses his own body as a shield. When rescuers find them later, the wounded man survives. Theo doesn't. In his pocket is a photograph. His wife and newborn daughter. They will never meet. Heroes like these were not chasing glory. They were just trying to get the guy next to them home alive. War taught them something true. Brotherhood is not formed by blood, but by who is willing to bleed for you. In the skies over Germany, another sacrifice unfolds. Lieutenant Joseph Maddox, pilot of a B-17 bomber, is hit by anti-aircraft fire. The plane lurches, one wing burning. Maddox orders his crew to bail out. They refuse. "We're not leaving you." "Yes," Maddox says, voice steady. "You are." He holds the aircraft steady, fumbling controls, eyelids heavy, smoke filling his lungs. One by one, the crew parachutes out. 7 chutes open. 7 lives saved. Maddox tries to jump last, but the plane tilts sharply. He goes down with it. Buried in American soil years later, he receives no parade. No textbook mentions his name. But 7 families had fathers, sons, and brothers to embrace again because of him. There are cemeteries in Europe and the Pacific where long rows of white crosses and stars stretch across the horizon. Silence lingers in the air, beautiful and heavy. Most graves have names. Some don't. Unknown American soldier. 4 words that hide a universe. Somewhere, in a small town in Missouri, a mother sits on her porch every day, holding a faded photograph of her son. She looks toward the horizon, hoping. She doesn't know he rests under that unknown marker. But the world he helped build continues moving. Children laugh in parks. Cities rise. Nations rebuild. Freedom paid with youth. These soldiers never made it home. Yet, their actions changed everything. Because victory is not measured by who returns. It's measured by who was willing not to. Some soldiers died believing they failed. They didn't know that history was quietly rearranging itself because of, them. In December 1944, deep in the Ardennes forest, a blizzard pounded the earth like the sky was trying to erase everything below it. Trees bent under the weight of ice. The wind cut through uniforms like knives. The Battle of the Bulge had begun. American troops were surrounded, freezing, outnumbered, low on ammunition. No warm clothes. The enemy expected them to surrender. Private Leonard Jackman was among them. He wasn't a hero. He didn't think of himself as brave. He just wanted to survive long enough to go home and marry the girl who waited for him back in Kentucky. But when German forces surrounded their position and demanded surrender, Jackman refused, not because he wanted glory, because next to him sat a 19-year-old who had never seen snow before that week, and Jackman wasn't going to let that kid die alone. He whispered, voice shaking from cold. "If I quit, he dies. If I hold, we both might live." The Germans tried again. Jackman raised his rifle and fired. He held his position for 30 hours, through frostbite, starvation, and unending gunfire. Reinforcements finally broke through the next day. Jackman was found slumped against a tree, rifle still in his frozen hands. He had died hours earlier, but because he held, his entire section lived. Those survivors would go on to help close the last major German offensive of the war. Jackman didn't get to finish his wedding vows, but he saved men who lived to walk their daughters down the aisle. That was his legacy. Across the Pacific, in the dense tropical heat of Iwo Jima, a Marine named Samuel Brooks moved through volcanic ash as bullets ripped through the air. The sand wasn't sand. It was black glass, sharp and burning hot. Every step felt like walking through hell. Brooks carried a flamethrower strapped to his back. It weighed 70 pounds, and every enemy soldier in a mile radius wanted him dead. Halfway up the ridge, he saw a wounded radio operator pinned down by machine gun fire. The man was screaming in pain, his leg a mess of blood and torn fabric. Brooks dropped everything and sprinted toward him. No weapon in his hands, no cover, no hesitation. He reached the radio operator, threw him over his shoulder, and began the crawl back down the ridge. A mortar blast sent them flying. Brooks shielded the man with his own body. When the smoke cleared, the radio operator was alive. Brooks wasn't. Later, the survivors would say, "He never even knew our names. He didn't need to. Courage doesn't ask for recognition." In France, during the liberation of a small village, something different happened, something quieter, but just as powerful. A young soldier named Joseph Ellis was ordered to clear a farmhouse believed to be full of enemy soldiers. He entered slowly, rifle ready instead of enemies. He found children, terrified, hiding under broken furniture. No parents, no food, no water. Ellis dropped his rifle. He took off his helmet and smiled. "Y'all are safe now, I promise." He radioed his squad leader and requested evacuation for civilians. The order came back, negative. Mission priority remains enemy forces. Ellis turned off his radio. He spent his rations feeding those children. He used his jacket to keep them warm. And when enemy soldiers returned to the farmhouse, Ellis stood between them and the children. He never fired a shot. After the war, the children told the story. He didn't fight us like enemies. He protected us like family. Those kids grew up, had children of their own, and every year that French village decorates one cross in the cemetery with American flags. They don't know his rank. They don't know his unit. They don't even know his birthday, but they know his heart. Some soldiers fight to win wars. Others fight to save souls. And then there are the ones whose bodies were never found. The missing. Their stories exist only in letters, in fading ink. "Tell Dad I'll be home by Christmas. Save me a slice of pie, okay? Don't worry, I'll be fine." An estimated 72,000 American soldiers from WWII are still unaccounted for. Their families waited, and waited, and waited. Some of them still do. A mother once asked a general, "Where is my son?" The general answered softly, "Everywhere freedom stands." On April 12, 1945, an American bomber was hit over the North Sea. Flames tore across the fuselage. The pilot, Lieutenant Richard Hale, shouted for his crew to jump. "I'll guide her down." Someone yelled. "No," Hale responded. "You jump." That's an order. He fought the controls with burned hands until the last parachute opened. He stayed behind the rest. When the plane hit the water, Hale died strapped into the seat. Divers would find the wreckage decades later. His watch was still ticking as though waiting for him to return. Some soldiers never saw the world they helped create, the world where people argue over movies, complain about traffic, hold their children tight, dream of futures the fallen never got to experience. They fought for a world they would not live in. They died for people who would never know their names. Freedom is easy to forget when you didn't pay the cost. Someone else already wrote the check. And yet, if you travel to Normandy, or Manila or Luxembourg, you will find American graves lined with flowers from strangers, small notes in shaky handwriting. "Thank you. We remember you. You saved our village." They are gone, but they are not forgotten. They came from towns with no map marker, from families with no legacy, from streets no one will ever visit, but they changed continents. Wars are won by strategy, freedom is won by sacrifice, and the greatest stories of war are often the stories of those who never came home. There is a strange moment in war, the instant a soldier realizes he may not return home. It doesn't come during the first gunshot or the first explosion. It comes quietly. For some, it happens on a transport ship crossing the Atlantic. For others, on a train leaving the station as families wave from the platform. For Sergeant Michael Dawson, it happened while writing a letter, Italy, 1943. Rain hammered the roof of a makeshift tent. Dawson sat on an ammo crate, pencil in hand, boots caked in months of mud. He wrote, "Don't worry, everything is fine." He stared at the words. He crossed them out. He began again. "Mom, please take care of the garden this spring, and tell Dad I'm proud to be his son." Then he stopped writing and just stared at the page. He finally understood. He wasn't writing to update them. He was writing to say goodbye. The next morning, during an assault near the Volturno River, Dawson led his men across open terrain. Halfway through, gunfire pinned them down. A young private cried out, barely 18, hands shaking so badly he couldn't reload. Dawson crawled across the mud to reach him. "Breathe," he whispered. The private nodded, wiped his eyes and steadied himself. A mortar shell exploded. The private lived. Dawson didn't. That letter reached home. It was stained with mud and rainwater. His mother pressed it to her face and wept. A letter is a soldier's voice when the world falls silent. Thousands of miles from Italy, in the blazing heat of New Guinea, Corporal Henry Dalton moved through the jungle with his platoon. Thick vines clung to their uniforms. Leeches crawled into their boots. The air was wet and heavy, like breathing through a soaked cloth. Dalton carried a camera. Not a gun, a camera. He was assigned to document troop movements. But Dalton refused to take pictures unless the soldiers allowed it. He used photography to make men feel human in a place designed to break them. One evening, while the platoon rested, Dalton photographed a group of soldiers writing letters home. One sharpened a pencil with his bayonet. Another chewed on a cigar, pretending it made him look tougher. Dalton captured laughter, hope, and exhaustion in a single frame. That night his platoon was ambushed. Machine guns erupted from the darkness. Dalton grabbed his camera, not to save himself, but to record where the fire was coming from. He exposed himself on purpose so his platoon could see the muzzle flashes. A burst of bullets hit him. He fell with the shutter still pressed down. Later, the platoon used those photographs to identify the enemy position and overrun it. Dalton never fired a weapon. He saved dozens of men. War takes lives, but sometimes a man can leave behind something that keeps others alive. There are other sacrifices. Quiet, invisible, unrecorded. Like the men who froze in foxholes during the brutal winter of 1944. Frostbite ate at their fingers until they could no longer pull triggers. Their bodies shook uncontrollably. Their feet turned black and numb, but they stayed. Because leaving meant the enemy would break through. And if the enemy broke through, the war would drag on, costing even more lives. One evening in a snowbound forest, Private Robert Kingsley removed his boots and placed them on the feet of another soldier who was going into shock. "You need these more than I do." Kingsley wrapped cloth around his bleeding feet and stepped into the snow. Again, frostbite took them by morning. In the evacuation tent, doctor said the words no soldier ever wants to hear. "We have to amputate." Kingsley nodded quietly. He didn't regret it. The soldier wearing Kingsley's boots went home. He raised a family. He lived to old age. When interviewed decades later, that man said, "I never knew someone could love another person that much in war. Some heroes never fired a weapon. They fought a different kind of battle." Virginia Hall, an American working for the OSS, moved through Nazi-occupied France disguised as a milkmaid. She carried forged papers, coded messages hidden in her clothing, and a radio transmitter disguised as a medical kit. Every message she sent brought Allied soldiers home. Every coded transmission saved lives. The Gestapo gave her a nickname. The most dangerous woman in Europe. She wasn't caught. She didn't die in combat. But the soldiers she guided to safety would later learn that many of the men she worked with were captured and executed. She spent the rest of her life wondering if she could have saved them. Some wounds are internal. The body heals. The memory does not. And then there were the men lost over the ocean. The air war over Europe was brutal. Bombers returned with engines missing, wings torn, bodies frozen stiff. Crews died not from bullets, but from the sky itself. During one mission, navigator Charles Reeves noticed the plane drifting off course in heavy cloud cover. He corrected the pilot and guided them back toward friendly airspace. A single minute later, flak tore open the cockpit. The blast severed Reeves's oxygen line. He began to fade, but he refused to go unconscious. He reconnected the line manually, but the burst of cold at altitude had shattered the connector. So he ripped open his glove and held the tube against his own wrist, using the pulse in his veins to feel if the oxygen was flowing. The skin on his hand froze solid. When the plane returned, Reeves was unconscious and his hand destroyed, but the crew alive. He died 2 days later from internal injuries. His last words were, "Did they make it home?" He didn't ask about medals or recognition. He asked about them. Sometimes the most profound part of sacrifice is that no one sees it happen. There is no spotlight, no heroic music, no camera crew, just a cold field, a dark sea, a silent jungle floor, and a life ending for someone else's future. At night, when soldiers tried to sleep, their minds filled with memories, a friend laughing at a joke, a shared cigarette behind sandbags, the sound of boots crunching snow, the voice of someone whispering, "We'll get through this." Sleep never came, because every soldier knew the truth. In war, tomorrow isn't guaranteed. There was a story told by a chaplain who served during the liberation of France. He entered a field hospital and found a young soldier, no older than 18, dying from his wounds. The boy looked up and asked, "Is the war over?" The chaplain hesitated. "Yes," he said quietly. "Yes, son. You did it." The boy smiled and took his last breath. The war was not over. But those words gave him peace. Sometimes the greatest gift a soldier can receive is the belief that their sacrifice meant something. There are battles that will never appear in history textbooks, small skirmishes in nameless towns, positions held for only a few hours, rivers crossed at midnight under fire. For the world, they were tiny moments. For the men who died there, they were everything. Every hope, every dream, every heartbeat. Left behind. There is a military cemetery in Italy, quiet and peaceful. If you visit at dawn, dew coats the grass like tears, and sunlight rests gently on thousands of perfectly aligned crosses. Each stone marks a story, a life, a future that never unfolded. Visitors walk slowly, reading names. Some graves have flowers, some have photographs, and some have nothing. Just a name and the date the world lost them. But in that silence, you feel something no camera can capture. They are not forgotten. Because by standing there, by reading their names, you are bringing them home. Freedom isn't free. It was bought with youth, with futures never lived, with names carved into white marble. They never came home. But because of them, millions did. Some sacrifices leave no marker, no cross, no date. Some disappear into the sea. In February 1943, the USS Dorchester carried more than 900 men through icy North Atlantic waters. German U-boats prowled those waters like wolves. Every man on that ship knew one thing: if a torpedo hit, the water would kill faster than the explosion. Among the passengers were 4 American chaplains: Alexander Good, George Fox, Clark Poling, and John Washington. Different backgrounds, different religions. But in war, faith is not divided. Shortly after midnight, a torpedo slammed into the hull. The Dorchester lurched violently. Lights went out. Freezing seawater flooded the lower decks. Men screamed and clawed their way up ladders. Within minutes, panic consumed the ship. The 4 chaplains did not panic. They handed out life vests. They guided men to lifeboats. They forced terrified soldiers to climb. When the life vests ran out, the chaplains took off their own. They passed them to 4 trembling soldiers and said, "Take it. You need it more." Those were the last words anyone heard from them. Witnesses in lifeboats watched as the chaplains stood together on the slanted deck, arms linked, praying while the ship slipped beneath black water. They knew they were going to die. They stayed anyway. Some heroes fight with rifles, others fight with love, and sometimes that's stronger than steel. When families received the telegrams they didn't understand, missing in action, lost at sea, because in truth, there wasn't anything left to bury. The ocean keeps its secrets. But the courage of those 4 men remains, proof that faith is not defined by religion but by how we treat those around us when everything falls apart. War forces boys to become men, and men to become memories. In the spring of 1945, a soldier named Andrew Fletcher marched into Germany with the 89th Infantry Division. His squad discovered something strange on their map, a compound that wasn't supposed to exist. A camp. The air smelled like burning cloth and sickness. Fletcher didn't know what he was walking into. He soon did. Behind the gate were thousands of hollow-eyed survivors, starving, skeletal, silent. They stared at the Americans with disbelief, as though freedom was a hallucination. Fletcher dropped his rifle. He tried to speak. No words came. A girl, maybe 14, stepped toward him and touched his sleeve. Her voice was barely a whisper. "You came," Fletcher later wrote in his diary. "That moment changed me more than any bullet ever could. The camp was liberated. A girl lived." Years later, at a memorial service, Fletcher's daughter asked him why he never talked about the war. He answered, "I didn't bring back war stories. I brought back ghosts." He never told her that he stayed behind that night, giving his own rations to starving prisoners until dawn, and when he finally slept, his heart stopped. He was 23. He never saw home again. But the girl lived. She became a mother. And a grandmother. Because an American soldier refused to walk away. Some heroes are known. Most are not. In 1944, a small squad of American infantry came under heavy sniper fire outside a French village. They took shelter behind a stone wall. One soldier was hit square in the leg and collapsed in the open. The others called out, telling him to crawl to cover. He tried. He couldn't. Corporal James Avery, quiet, ordinary, a postal clerk before the war, did not wait for orders. He leapt the wall and sprinted into the open. Gunshots cracked. Bullets tore into the ground next to him. He ignored them. He threw the wounded soldier over his shoulder and ran back toward the wall. Halfway across, another shot rang out. Avery fell to his knees but forced himself upright, staggering the last few feet. He dropped the man beside his squad and collapsed. His last words were, "Get him home." The soldier Avery carried survived. Avery didn't. At his funeral, a flag was folded and placed into his mother's hands. She clutched it like it was her son's heartbeat. There will always be nations, borders, lines on maps. But courage like that belongs to everyone. Another forgotten hero walked into history without a weapon. His name was Desmond Doss. In Okinawa, his unit fought up a towering ridge into machine gun fire so intense the air itself seemed to scream. Men fell. Others ran. Chaos swallowed everything. But one soldier ran the opposite direction, back toward the gunfire. Doss wasn't carrying a rifle. He carried faith. One by one, he dragged the wounded to the cliff's edge, patched their wounds, and lowered them down with a rope. Each time he saved someone, he whispered the same prayer, "Just one more. Please, God, help me get just one more." He saved 75 men. He returned to the ridge again and again until his uniform was soaked with blood that wasn't his. He lived. Others lived because of him. Some were men who once mocked him for refusing to carry a weapon. War breaks people. Doss proved it could also reveal greatness. In the Pacific, on a tiny island ringed by coral and fire, another soldier faced a moment that defined his soul. Staff Sergeant Raymond Kelly found himself leading 5 men against an enemy force 20 times their size. Their radios were dead. Their ammo nearly gone. One of the younger soldiers, shaking uncontrollably, asked, "What do we do?" Kelly wiped sweat from his eyes. "We hold." For hours, bullets shredded the trees around them. Grenades shook the ground. The enemy kept coming. Kelly stood his ground. When reinforcements arrived the next morning, they found Kelly kneeling in the sand, rifle empty, body riddled with wounds. His men were alive, clustered behind cover where he had ordered them to stay. Kelly was already gone. He died kneeling, facing the enemy, watching over his men until his last breath. Some men died fighting, others died praying, but all of them died, believing that if they held on a little longer, someone else might live. That is the essence of sacrifice. It is not about being fearless. It is about protecting someone else even when you are afraid. Snow falls in wet, heavy sheets over a French crossroads. The ground is frozen mud. The smell, diesel fumes, gunpowder, and something metallic. Blood. A young American lieutenant, 21, barely out of college, presses his back against a wrecked Sherman tank. His radio is shattered. His map is soaked. He has no idea that he and the small platoon behind him are the only U.S. soldiers standing. Between a German armored column and a nearby medical station filled with wounded, he whispers to his sergeant, voice cracking. Not from fear, but from something else. If we don't stop them here, they'll reach the hospital. The sergeant nods. No debate, no hesitation. They know what they are choosing. The lieutenant lifts a flare gun and fires a single red signal into the night sky. It's a message to the artillery batteries far behind them. Strike here, strike on us. The ground quakes. American shells crash down, too close. The sky becomes white fire. When the guns finally fall silent, the armored column is gone. So is the platoon. Historians would later call it a defensive delay. The medical staff would call it miraculous. The families back home would receive short, cold telegrams, killed in action. No further details. No record of the choice they made. No record of the lives they saved. On an airfield in the Pacific, another kind of battle is unfolding. An American pilot sits inside a B-24 bomber named Mercy's Hunger. He's not flying a combat mission today. He's flying food. He's dropping crates, rice, medicine, rations, for starving civilians trapped between Allied forces and retreating Japanese troops. The plane flies low, too low. Rifle fire shreds the tail. An engine coughs black smoke. The co-pilot begs him to turn back. "We can't," the pilot says. "There are people waiting." The radio picks up distant Japanese transmissions. The pilot pushes the throttle forward. He manages to drop the supplies, but the bomber doesn't climb. It doesn't have the power. They hit the water. Only 2 men make it out of the sinking aircraft. Weeks later, a survivor meets a group of locals, thin, starving, eyes wide with disbelief. They show him the crates, the food that kept hundreds alive. The pilot didn't win a medal, no parade, no photo in Life magazine, just a name lost on a casualty list, buried under thousands of others. But on an island most Americans have never heard of. He was hope. In Italy, a medic crawls across shattered stones toward a wounded soldier crying for help. The sniper targeting the road has already killed 8 men. Everyone knows stepping into that line of sight is suicide. The medic goes anyway, not because he expects to live, because someone is screaming. He reaches the wounded soldier, bandages him, covers him with his own body while tracing a new path back to cover. A sniper's bullet tears into the medic's shoulder. Another hits his hip. He keeps crawling. He drags the wounded man behind a destroyed wall and collapses. Hours later, another medic reaches them. The first medic mumbles one small request. "Don't tell my mom how scared I was." He dies that night. The man he saved names his firstborn son after him. Across Europe, in Normandy, in the Ardennes, on the road to Berlin, young men made impossible choices. They weren't strategists. They weren't generals. They were farm kids, factory workers, steel mill hands, grocery clerks, truck drivers. They didn't come home. Their names exist only on weathered white crosses. There are graves of Americans in France, Belgium, Luxembourg, Italy, thousands of them. Some graves say a name. Some say only, "Here rests in honored glory a comrade in arms known but to God." Imagine that. A life so big to someone. A son, a brother, a fiancé, and now a white stone with no name. There is a grave in Luxembourg where fresh flowers appear every week. Nobody knows who leaves them. The cemetery groundskeeper once caught an elderly woman crying by the headstone. She whispered, "I never met him, but he saved my village." She walks away without telling her name. We grow up learning about generals and presidents, about Eisenhower, Patton, MacArthur. But wars are not won by people whose names are written in history books. Wars are won by the ones who never got the chance to come home and tell their stories. The boy who shielded his platoon from machine gun fire. The radio operator who refused to leave his signal post. The infantryman who charged a bunker so his friends could reach safety. The bomber pilot who delivered food instead of bombs. No newsreel footage. No grand speeches. Just a final act of choice. To give everything so others could live. You don't have to know their names. Just know this. Every freedom we have was paid for by someone whose story we will never hear. And somewhere, In silence, under a white cross far away from home, a hero waits for someone to remember,